I sat down with Rijul Narwal to talk about emotional sustainability. Rijul is an eco-social innovator, action-based researcher, and multidisciplinary designer. She's a systems thinker who is passionate about harnessing creativity and strategic thinking to drive transformational change. Grounded in empathy and critical reflection, her design practice explores the intricate connections between human attitudes and behaviours. With a focus on collaborative practices and design methodologies, she specialises in driving innovative solutions for positive eco-social impact. She leverages design as a facilitation tool, addressing complex intersectional issues and generating social sustainability. Rijul is on a journey to explore the potential of design in shaping a world that thrives socially and environmentally, guided by an unwavering commitment to meaningful impact and sustainable solutions. In our conversation, we shared how we both became interested in emotional sustainability, how we explain it to others, how we use it in our own lives, and how it's guiding us going forward in both our work and our lives.
Thanks for being here today, Rijul. As we kind of discussed together what we wanted the structure and flow of the conversation to be. So I think let's just dive right into our check-in.
Yeah.
And our check-in question, which is, how are you feeling today? And then the follow-up, I'm going to let you answer the first bit.
Okay. I'm feeling good. Like in general, everything's good. I just stubbed my toe yesterday on the fridge corner, so that's just been a little pain point. But yeah, it's I've had a session before this, so I'm feeling inspired. How
Okay,
about
feeling
you?
inspired. Well, I'm going to follow up with the second bit of the question first, which is,
Okay.
if that feeling was a living or non-living entity, what would it be?
Okay. I think for me, it's like a wobbly table.
Yeah.
Maybe like one leg is short because I feel like when I'm walking, I'm limping slightly. So I'm functioning fine, but it's just like every time I walk, it's just that slight feeling
Yeah.
of something's off. But yeah,
Okay, great. A wobbly table.
yeah.
Okay.
And how
So,
about you?
yeah.
How are you feeling?
How am I feeling? I am feeling more present and awake than I have been in the past couple of days. I slept really well,
That-
even though I had some weird dreams. I'm just coming to the end of my period, and maybe I shouldn't say that in an interview, but I do think we should normalize conversations
yeah.
about everything like this. And so, yeah, I also have some it's interesting that you mentioned physical pain. I have some slight physical pain.
Yeah.
But emotionally, I think I feel excited about this conversation.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and a bit
Yeah.
energized.
So how would you put your feeling like a living or non-living entity?
It was the thing that's coming to mind, and it's probably more to do with what I ate for dinner yesterday, but it's like some melted mozzarella that's a bit crispy on top. But I think it's that kind of like when you're holding tension and then something happens, like you go in the oven or you have a good night's sleep and it changes
Yeah.
your like being. So I've kind of gone from one form and then overnight become a bit like melted and more delicious. So I think just noticing like the change in like physical, emotional, mental from having a
Yeah.
good night's sleep, and yeah, that kind of process that we're going through all the time. So I feel like
Yeah.
melted mozzarella.
I love that. It's also how you're you're being affected by the environment around you. And yeah, that makes so much sense because even with the wobbly table, I'm just thinking that with the like life's really good with like three aspects. So maybe like, family, friends, support system, opportunities, creatively, I'm like fine. But as I'm looking for full-time opportunities, I'm like, this is going to happen. Like there's so much effort I have to put on that leg to make it stable. Um, but yeah, the environment aspect, I love that.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So a wobbly table and a melted mozzarella are going to have a conversation about emotional sustainability. And we decided that we would start with what got us interested in emotional
Yeah.
sustainability. And I am going to kick that off because my journey started 10 years ago and yours was more recent. So Yeah, what got me interested? So I did some reflections on this yesterday. And of course, it was when I did my master's at London College of Fashion, which I did between end of 2013 and the end of 2015. So I was a part-time student.
Yeah.
And it was in fashion and the environment. So I had gone into this master's thinking that I would be working more within craft. So my background is textile design. I'd worked with a socially responsible bed linen company in Egypt where we taught women to hand embroider. I'd been in India and studied hand embroidery for 2 months. So I was really in a craft space, but also really interested in how craft and like socialism and activism kind of goes together and how it's used as a medium of like communication and expression and I guess resistance in some ways. So there was always like a kind of social justice communication element to what I was interested in. But it was in my second term when I was writing an essay about ethical consumption and consumerism and whether it's a reality or a myth. And during that research, I got really, really interested in values and like, what are values? Where do they come from? Why do we have them? And how is it that we have this kind of seemingly valueless society where we just throw away clothes, like we, planned obsolescence. So this rampant like capitalism and consumerism that doesn't reflect a lot of the values that we say are important to us.
Yeah.
In that space, I was like, I need to talk to people about their values and why we have this values action gap. And I tried to just talk to some other students, some of the BA students, and just ask them, tell me, what are your like top 3 values? And I didn't really get very far with that, just asking people. So I kind of had to use my creativity and I had to design a workshop and get people to think about them differently. So that was kind of my starting point for like becoming a facilitator and kind of creating these spaces where people could connect to things on a deeper level.
Yeah.
And I think the other really important thing for me at that time, and this is kind of what I was reflecting about, was I'd gone through a really difficult personal time. When I moved back from Egypt, I was really struggling to adjust back to being in the UK. Like to be honest, felt like a complete failure. No like money, no job, no relationship, didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, like spent my entire 20s not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And so I had to use my creativity to figure out who I was.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, when creativity really changed for me, because I had gone from just being creative, like being a designer, being an artist, like doing well in that, but not really using my creativity to understand like myself or the world around me. It was kind of more like the aesthetic part of like, can you draw a good picture? Can you make a good design? Not like what actually is really naturally human and creative about understanding and creating new things. And during that period of being very lost, I really had this sense of having an empty void like within me. And I used to fill that with fast fashion. I would go shopping all the time. And so I think being away in another country where I was kind of a little bit taken out of that real consumerism space,
Yeah.
in Egypt, I really remember like not seeing any billboards and advertising and how refreshing that was. And every time I came back to the UK, just feeling really bombarded with all this kind of advertising and then that desire to want something that you don't really need. So kind of reflecting on that experience, going through this very difficult emotional time, I think emotional sustainability was what I needed at that time.
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to sustain myself in my life so that I can connect to things that I care about and things that are important to me? And the values was the starting place for understanding like what's important to me and what do I care about from a very personal level.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's how I started. I think the other really important thing in that journey was starting a philosophy course that I just did, sort of this fun like evening course in philosophy, critical philosophy it was called. And in that, the first thing that they ask you to do is, well, every session we would have what they called a pause. So we would pause, like a short mindfulness practice, but I guess it was my first introduction to becoming aware of being the observer and noticing your thoughts and your feelings. And then the first question they asked us on the first evening was, go away, experience something in your life that like maybe makes you angry or annoys you. And in that moment, ask yourself the question, what would a wise person do?
Okay.
And that I think that question, it really, like, obviously it really had an impact because I can still remember it now.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of slowing down in the moment and asking your, because you can be the wise person, like that's the choice that we can make. And so I think that self-awareness and slowing down and becoming aware of our inner world and how that impacts our outer world,
Yeah.
and that for me is really, I guess, at the heart of emotional sustainability. So yeah, I think I'll stop there because that's quite a lot. But yeah, so it was really a combination of coming together from a difficult time and studying this master's in this kind of fashion and the environment, what about sustainability, about how do we make the world a better place, but ending up coming from this place of values, that values are the foundation of sustainable thinking. And at the time I went to so many events and I used to get a bit frustrated and confused that no one was talking about values. They were just talking about like solutions, but nothing. So I think I've always been interested in going a bit deeper to the kind of causes or foundations of what it means to be human.
Yeah, I love that. I think your reflection worked really well. I love the storyline. Um, I think I came at it from some of very similar points. So I did it as a part of my master's final major project, or like what we would call a thesis. And before this master's, so I had a background I did my bachelor's in like product design, lifestyle accessories, and I minored in textile design. So I worked with a lot of materials, so like wood, metal, ceramics, textiles, and it was a lot of making. And studying that course in India focused a lot on what's the outcome, what product are you making, how are you going to sell it, who's the consumer. So there was a lot of focus on sort of the end product and how it's going to help us make money. And I understand the point that since it's in India and like there's a higher competition because there's a bigger population and still limited roles. And as part of that, I also, like part of that degree, I also did a study abroad year at Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. And that was like the big exposure to all big brands. And, being able to just walk to Fifth Avenue was quite a privilege. But the same values sort of got reinstated there, where they would be like, okay, how are you going to sell it? And it was all about the storyline. And I remember for my thesis there, I had thought of that because we worked so much with leather, there were a lot of scraps. I wanted to sort of collect all the scraps from the workshops because there were like more than 5 workshops and maybe some 5 courses as well. So I wanted to collect all the scraps, put them together, and basically make new products out of what was considered waste. And I was discussing it with my professor, and I told him that, okay, I'm planning to put like cardboard boxes in all the labs so people can put their scraps specifically and it'll be easier for me to collect. And I remember this one thing that he said where he's like, why are you bothering to collect those? You can take a full leather hide or like a full leather skin and just cut it into scraps and pretend like you collected them. And that just, it switched something on in my mind where I was like, is this what I want to continue doing in life? And at the same time, COVID had hit. I had just gone back home. After a good 6 years, I was getting to spend a lot of time with my family, got a lot of rejuvenation time, good community. So I decided that, okay, I don't want to just step into a job where I'm doing these things constantly. I want to study something that aligns with what's driving my brain. I did a lot of research, and that's when I found this MA at UAL. And it's quite a long name. It's called MA Design for Social Innovation and Sustainable Futures. And the way the course was laid out was amazing. It was quite values driven. It was a lot of process focused, because I think my biggest frustration point during my bachelor's was, why are these people making these design decisions? What's driving these decisions? They felt like they were more desirability driven than usability or functionality, and it was very consumer focused. Instead of like, it wasn't just for well-being, it was more for making money, and like that was a big divide. So through the course, I think that was the first time I felt like I had a community of people who saw design the same way I did, who saw design as being able to make positive impact on communities, on people, or designing not just for selling products but for like well-being of people. And I feel like in India there are people who do, like, I've come across people who do mental health projects, but I hadn't had the chance to be exposed to designing for well-being. And that just paired up with a few cultural aspects, like growing up in a culture where people would say, oh, you should not showcase your emotions, or they're like a personal aspect of your life, or like a person who's showing emotions is like weak. And just those aspects were so deeply ingrained. And through the course, they sort of got debugged. I remember during our first unit, we had this class where it was like, okay, how do you write a problem statement? And my tutor at the time had put together a presentation, and the first slide was using your anger as a compass. And the whole sort of the starting of the session was, okay, what are you really angry about? Write it down. And I was like, okay, this is very interesting, because as a kid, I've been told that I'm very angry, or I have anger issues. I'm like, this is so interesting, because she's like, okay, you're angry. And then she helped us break it down into, okay, it's probably you're angry because it's not aligning with your values. The same thing how you said that values are foundational. So something that happened didn't align with our values, and that's why we were angry. And how we can use design to cater to that, which was very interesting. So I think throughout the course, the sort of idea of bringing emotions into the work, bringing up positionality as a designer came into work. And during my thesis, I was like, okay, I'm going to do a project that really aligns with me. So I was like, okay, what are my frustration points right now in my life? And I went around, like, all post-its on Miro board physically. And I was like, okay, I'm having a lot of issues with how my relationship is with my tech, or like it's draining, energy and time from my days instead of me being able to do other valuable things. And so I started actually my inquiry point from a tech point of view. So I listened to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, um, like mind mapped all of those things. And I had actually felt a slight trigger a few weeks before that. So I had asked for like a mental health professional through my UAL health network, and that had like a waiting list. And eventually, when I spoke to the counselor, I was like, I don't think I need this. At that time, I was having a tough time. But she was so kind. She was like, okay, let's still talk about it. And she helped me realize that it wasn't, that what I felt wasn't just like a heavy feeling. It was something that had gotten triggered in my emotional brain. And then I started researching into emotions. I feel like it was a theme before then, but I hadn't deep dived into it. Um, and that's when I came across your website, actually, which said emotional sustainability and the entire emotional sustainability framework. And I remember I took the web page to my supervisor, and I was like, this is exactly what I am trying to say. This is a problem I'm trying to solve. This is what I want to do. And she's like, okay, so what are the next steps? Or like, what have you thought about it? I was like, I don't know, but this is it. These two words make complete sense. Because also a lot of times when people talk about sustainability, for example, they talk about environmental sustainability or material sustainability. And that narrative is detached a lot of the times from mental health. Eco anxiety is like one entry point into the whole narrative, but I feel like when someone just uses the word sustainability, a lot of my friends who are not from design backgrounds are like, oh, so you mean like eco-friendly or like bamboo products? And I'm like, that's not it. the word has sort of lost meaning over time with marketing and all those aspects. But I think through emotional sustainability or putting those two words together, I was trying to make a lot of sense of the work I had been doing. A lot of my projects were around, okay, how do I make people critically reflect on their actions, or like why is human behavior being designed this way? And the funniest thing is, when I went back to all my post-it notes from my research into tech, there was such a big theme of reflection, of sitting with yourself, or like thoughts, which I hadn't seen because my judgment was clouded. But yeah, I think the whole emotional sustainability thing sort of, it was serendipity maybe that I happened on your website, and I was like, whatever this person is saying, she's just taken my thoughts and she's put it on a website. And yeah, I think that was how it started for me.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, I think one thing that really stood out for me from that, because it was something that I wrote down yesterday, because I love etymology. I love to look at like the root meaning of words. And
Yeah.
actually the root meaning of emotion is a social moving, stirring, or agitation. And so I
Yeah.
think what I really get from you is that by connecting to your emotions, it created this like movement and this action in you to want to do something, to make a change, to do something
Yeah.
differently. And
Yeah.
I really feel that that's why not focusing on emotions and creating this kind of numb, dull state in people by kind of, framing them as negative or weakness, when actually they're like superpowers and strengths, means that, people are walking around they're stuck. They're like not able to move out of one situation into another because they're not working with their emotions. They're kind
Yeah.
of working against them, or like numbing them or pushing them down. And they
Yeah.
create such a flow of movement and towards things, that are important to us. And the other thing, I guess, is just really picking up on, the role of design and your transformation in thinking around what is the purpose of design? Is it just about making money and this aesthetic, or is it actually the impact? And, we know that, like, I think it's like 80% of the environmental impact of a product is decided in the design phase. So the responsibility of designers.
Yeah.
And so what is driving those designers to make decisions? And could it be something more values-based, with more care and connection to the world and the impact? And just the final thing, I think about reflection, because when I was looking at my notes, I had in my master's like sketchbook something about, it was a sort of primary school education program. And it showed for me these different things of personal development, emotional well-being, transformative learning, creative interventions, critical thinking and reflection. So that's really what we're trying to develop in humans with emotional sustainability, is to say, like, when we connect with our emotions, when we connect with our values, when we connect with our creativity, when we take time to reflect, like, these are all the skills that we can develop in people and create that kind of potential for transformation. So I guess as you are quite newly graduated and putting your work out into the world now, I would love to know how you explain emotional sustainability to other people.
That's a very interesting question, because I feel like until I came across your website and just the juxtaposition of the two words, emotional and sustainability, I was having an extremely difficult time even having like a word to explain the problem. And I think after those two words, I sort of started explaining it to people in terms of context. I would pick up a situation and I'd be like, okay, when something like this happens, or I'd say, for example, that a lot of people are like burnt out, or things like where they're like, okay, we need a mental health day off. To a lot of my lawyer friends or like people who are working in corporate, I would be like, maybe burnout days are happening because every day is not emotionally sustainable, because emotions are coming into our minds constantly, and like they're a ever present thing. It's not that, okay, you can just schedule one day in like 3 months where it's like, okay, today you have time for yourself. It needs to be an inbuilt practice. And then I came across this TED talk which talked about emotional first aid. So I started sort of picking words and phrases from here and there. So I think now how I explain it to people is um, I'm really interested in emotional sustainability. And it's something, the problem where I see the problem is that we can't treat our emotions like this forever. I sometimes give a little bit of background, like, I come from India and I grew up in a culture where emotions were highly suppressed. And I felt like the work I was doing was not meaningful. Whereas when I came to my master's, I did a lot of work, which was inviting emotions into the work, asking, okay, how are you connecting your emotions to this project? And that gave me a lot of, like, my positionality as a designer in the project. It helped me acknowledge the biases instead of just trying to remove them away, acknowledge why they are there, and then use them and be like, okay, this is how I feel about this. This is why. And a lot of the times I feel like when I bring my emotions into the project, it gives me a lot of passion. It gives me the energy and the enthusiasm to explore the project beyond just the immediate resources I would typically look at. And yeah, so I tell them that, you know, I've experienced how bringing my emotions into projects has helped me. And like just that bridging that disconnect in my practice has helped me. And I feel like if all of us were able to practice emotional first aid, people wouldn't have as much, I don't want to say trauma, but maybe as much friction between like difference in opinions. A lot of times people have aligned values but different opinions. Yeah, so I borrow terms from you, from different people, and I try to explain it as a bigger. I think also for me, emotional sustainability is the thread that I use to make sense of all the problems. It's in my head. I think it's sort of a solution that, if implemented, not a solution that's a very end term, end of project term, but something that sort of, it's a value that if it's put into projects, we'll be able to solve or like design for more problems instead of just creating more problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very a long-winded answer, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah, what really stood out for me was this feeling of when we make space for emotions, it's like making us alive as humans. Like because we are humans that feel, like what's that saying? But we're human beings, not human doings. But yeah, there's the same thing
Yeah,
of like that we feel, not think kind of
yeah.
first.
I think it's we are feeling creatures who think, not thinking creatures who
Yeah,
feel. Yeah,
that's it.
yeah,
Yeah. So we and actually by really making space for all of the feelings, then we're really allowing like the maximum experience of life. And
yeah,
don't we all just want to feel more alive?
yeah,
And I love Marshall Rosenberg in Nonviolent Communication says that he's like he doesn't categorize feelings as good or bad because all feelings are an expression of life.
yeah,
And so, and I loved what you said about, when we bring the feelings in, we can see we can have different opinions because we can see where our values are aligned. We can take ownership of our feelings and understand like why we feel that way, maybe how that creates some certain bias or even assumptions about other people, but making that space for those differences of opinions to exist, to coexist, because we understand like the feelings behind them.
yeah,
So that really stood out for me. There was one other thing. I've forgotten it now. But yeah, I think it really makes sense. And I guess also knowing you as a designer and thinking about you wanting to get designers to think about this at the design stage and
yeah,
like what would be the change that created. And I think my sense is that in lots of people's work, they feel either directly or indirectly, that they're being asked to put their emotions to one side, because maybe
Yeah.
I imagine that there are some jobs that require a kind of disconnect from emotions, or a sort of brushing aside of our real true values because they don't align with what the work requires.
Yeah.
And I can't really even begin to imagine what that does to someone kind of internally, like when you live that every day,
Yeah.
that what you're doing with your time every day when you're alive as this human is conflicting with your emotions and with your values. Like,
Yeah.
what internal dissonance does that create, and what's the impact of that? So and dominant narratives and capitalist neoliberalism obviously is creating that dissonance. It's what Tim Kessler says in his work about these junk values, that these extrinsic external values that we think we need to aspire to, like image, money, power, status, prestige, but actually what we need to do is focus on our intrinsic values, the
Yeah.
ones that are really important and meaningful.
Yeah.
And like the way that you talked about how emotions really connect us to what is meaningful in our lives.
Yeah. I think also something that, because you mentioned like corporate and capitalist societies, something that as designers or as design students, especially, we're asked to do is place our projects in context of the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So they're like, okay, which sort of goal is your project trying to like be a part of, or is like sort of impacting? And I remember, because I was struggling to like articulate my idea or my thought process, so I went to the UN SDGs to see, okay, like how are they saying that mental health needs to be addressed, or like what are their sort of like, okay, this is what we need to address. And I remember it's UN SDG 3, health and well-being for all. And all the targets under that, I think there are 7 or 13 targets under that. And it's a green color icon, I clearly remember. And all the targets under that are very oriented against the absence of illnesses and diseases, which is absolutely necessary. But there's no mention of the word mental health itself. And I came across an article which said that UN SDGs, they measure progress or success in terms of GDP. And GDP, after, while it has a direct proportion, like it's directly proportional to health and well-being, it's only till a certain point. Of course, once you have like the financial means to do things, life does become easier. And then it says that after a point of GDP growth, after reaching a saturation point, that direct proportionality disappears. And it's not that the curve flattens or something. It's after that, there's like a very harsh drop. It directly becomes like indirectly proportional. And that's just something so interesting, because it's like, okay, we're going to use that to measure our well-being. And after a certain GDP growth, they're like, okay, it is clear that it's not going to work anymore. We need a better model, a better framework to understand what success looks like, or to understand how do we design for well-being, or what is our actual goal. We like, I think for me it's like well-being of people in general. So how do we model that progress goal?
Yeah, like Bhutan's gross domestic happiness
Yeah.
framework. When I thought about this question of how I explain it, I think after my master's, I think this is the difference in our practice, because you are a designer, and so you're thinking about how to apply this. It's much more practical and tangible, I think, which is what I love about your work. I think what I discovered in my master's was facilitation, and how much I love creating spaces, designing spaces and processes for people. So I continued more to develop my facilitation practice. And although I had done workshops around sustaining ourselves during my master's, the practicalities of life, just having to get a job, kind of took over. So I think I sort of left that theory on my website and almost moved on, and which is why it's so amazing that you somehow found it.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't something that I continued to kind of talk about necessarily, but I took everything in it and have continued, like you said about threads, like there are so many threads within that framework that I have continued to explore or apply.
Yeah.
So for instance, when I facilitate, I use, and I have done a lot of facilitation around values. So values continue, well, a very strong thread that has continued. But even if I'm working with someone who doesn't explicitly want to talk about values, I bring them into workshops in check-in. So I ask people pick a value from a selection of cards and say like why it's important to you, because I recognize that in these spaces where you're bringing people together, things like values and emotions, because they're universal, then they create a sort of an understanding. They start building relationships. They start allowing us to understand each other on the level of like common humanity. So beyond our differences. So like, oh, what does honesty love mean to you? What does love mean to you? Or, oh, you're feeling a bit frustrated today, or you're feeling really joyful. We can start connecting because we recognize those things in others, in ourselves. So I always use them in my facilitation work. And I would say that's probably like the main thing that I've done. I've been unpacking lots of other aspects, I guess, of like what it means to be human and how our emotions like affect us. And I suppose within that, looking at different communication approaches. So nonviolent communication, I would say, is the most obvious one to go to when we're talking about emotions, because we have this language of feelings and needs. And I do use that in workshops sometimes. And it's very powerful to be able to give that to people and say, these are all the things that you could be feeling. Because people, when you often ask them how they're feeling, they might say, oh, I'm okay, or I'm fine, which actually are not emotions. They might be feelings. And I think it is important to distinguish between emotions and feelings, in the sense that emotions are physiological, that they're this kind of instantaneous physiological reaction in our body when we're in a situation and something happens, and then we suddenly feel sad or angry or joyful. And then they're kind of more public and short, like it just happens, we feel it, maybe someone else can see that in your body language or your face. But those feelings, they're more private, they kind of last longer, and they're connected more to what's happened to us in the past and our thoughts, like, because our thoughts and our feelings start to intermingle and create these different stories about ourselves and about other people. And so I think when we can start to differentiate between those and just be really present in our body with our emotions, and then take that time to reflect on our thoughts and our feelings and what's behind that, then I think it gives us more opportunity to manage them in a way that's like positive for us. So, and that's sort of, I guess, going a little bit into the next question of how we use emotional sustainability in our own lives. So,
Also, just picking up from what you just said, I think what I remember the first time I met you, what really stood out to me was how you took emotional sustainability, and you, like, when I saw that you're a workshop facilitator, it stood out so much to me, because a lot of workshops are where design decisions are made. And like through my project, I was trying to understand how do I give this practice to designers. And when I came across your practice, I was like, this is such a good way, especially because you said even when workshops are not values driven, or like it's not, the workshop has nothing to do with values, you try to bring them into mindfulness practices. And that's interesting, so that if I see it as like a hypothetical situation, I'm there and I know, okay, that this person has spoken about similar values to me, but they put across a different opinion when we're discussing, I'll still remember that, okay, this is the value that's driving them, and it might help me see what connection they have, which is very interesting. And the second point that you said about emotions, feelings, and thoughts is something that I did bring into my project, into my practice. The first time I came across a breakdown of emotion during COVID, how you said etymology. So someone had described it as energy in motion. So emotion, which was crazy because it's like we're trying to stop it from moving, but it needs to move. So how do I bring it into my practice? The first thing I would say during my actual project, how I did it, was that I was trying to like interact a lot with people because it was emotions can be such a difficult topic for a few people to open up about. I'm not saying that people like shun them away, but a lot of exploration is like surface level. And I think Goffman has this theory where it's front stage, backstage, where it's in the front of the stage, people say something else, but all the work happens backstage. And to just open that curtain and have those conversations with people, I was like, I need to approach this project with sensitivity and I need to make genuine connections with people instead of just doing projects and deliverables. I wanted to actually deep dive into it. So I picked my case study to be international students. Having been an international student, I've been living on my own since past 12 years. So I've gone through that emotional turmoil multiple times. And I remember every time I moved cities, I moved countries, I had this feeling like, okay, I'm getting to know myself again. It's time to be a new person. What do I want to shed off? What do I want to bring in? Um, you get to reinvent yourself. And I loved that aspect. But I do remember the first time I moved cities and I was away from my parents. I went to a boarding school. I remember the emotional turmoil that came with it. And this is back in 2012. I was in eighth grade. We had no, like, for the first 10 days, my parents couldn't even call me. And I went to South India from North India. There's a big cultural difference. I was experiencing cultural shock. I was in a dorm with 40 other girls, and I knew no one. Different food. It was quite a cultural shock. And I feel like a lot of people, when they move countries, as even as international students, experience the same thing. So I was like, these people who have freshly experienced the emotional turmoil, I want to like design with them, design for them. I think this is a good set also because I was at UAL. UAL is super international with their student body. So I was like, okay, this is my case study. And also because they were design students. And I wanted to understand because design students, I feel like they're quite aware about mental health, even if it's not just in their practice, but from students around them who are working on mental health projects. So I wanted to understand how their relationship with their emotions is. And that's sort of where I sort of started deep diving. There's a framework that they use in UX design, which is called an empathy map, which does it separates emotions, feelings, thoughts, and actions, which was very interesting because I feel like even I'm quite interested in etymology. And when I was looking at connotations of emotions and um, mental health or mental illnesses, it was very different. And I feel like when we use the term mental health, it sort of it's a blanket term over so many things, and it's relating that how you said the distinction between emotions being short, feelings being longer, and thoughts being even separate. Mental health sort of put a blanket over the entire thing. So a lot of times when people would ask me why are you doing an emotional sustainability project, isn't this just mental health? And I'm like, mental health is an aspect of emotional sustainability, actually, because mental health also implies, since mental health came from, it sort of trickled down from mental illnesses and like more to the everyday aspects. It comes from a point of view of illness or problem. And I've realized that from my cultural context as well, when people hear the word mental health, they're like, nothing's wrong with me, my brain's fine, I don't need to go to a brain doctor. And I understand that people want to be self sufficient, people want to have the tools and the resources to be able to manage their emotions on a daily basis. Having something so intrinsic that makes you human, which is like emotions and feelings. And for a split second, feeling like, okay, I'm not able to manage myself. How am I going to manage all the other stressors of life? I understand if people don't want to go to a mental health professional. And that's why I think I sort of came up with the emotional first aid idea that maybe this is something that I want to design um, for like the international students. I did a lot of um, primary research in which I did, I interacted with a lot of students, I think some 45, 47 students, where I did compassion spaces basically, interacting with them one on one, understanding their mental models around emotions. I did this, designed this lovely activity called Toast Your Emotions. And it was inspired by this talk I saw on TED. And basically, the guy's name is Tom Wojcik, I think, if I'm pronouncing it right. And he does this activity around systems thinking workshops with big corporates, where to align the values of the team, he asks them, okay, show me like how to draw a toast, like, or draw how to make a toast. And basically, then he asks them to put it all together and make a bigger map. And in his talk, he says that he does this to understand the mental models that are driving their decision making. And I was like, I want to understand people's mental models around emotions. So I took that activity. I sort of shifted it into, okay, I'll do a first bit where it's like they're showing me, because obviously I'm dealing with a creative group. I said that, okay, like, it's part of my thesis project. Can you draw how to make a toast? And then if they were interested, I went on to the second part. Actually, maybe this is a good time for me to share my website. So I did this activity called Toast Your Emotions with students, and I would go around asking them, like just with a bunch of colorful pens and post-it notes, if they could like draw out how to make a toast for me. And dealing with a creative set of stakeholders, this worked really well because all of the projects that they were doing were more like for college or other aspects. So they got a second to just like be creative. And then I would invite them if they were still interested to do like a second part for my project. And I would say, then I would introduce my project, tell them about emotional sustainability, and sort of create a reflection space with them where I'm like, let's see how you just broke down the toast. So some people would go to the extent of, okay, you go to a grocery store and you buy bread, or you buy the ingredients to bake a bread. And then at some point, the toast either gets on a pan or in like a toaster, and then you put it on a plate. Some people would be like, okay, you put peanut butter over it, or like enjoy it while watching your favorite show. And I would invite them to think about their emotion in a similar way, sort of just how like the bread or the ingredients to bake a bread come from like a grocery store. What sort of sparked their emotion? Where did that sort of ignite from? And just how you realize the bread is toasted when you see the color changing. How did they recognize that they were experiencing that emotion? Was it through like a physical symptom, or like did someone point it out, or like if they have any other practice? And then the third step would be just how you're like, okay, so I saw the bread is toasted. Now I'm enjoying it with like peanut butter, or I'm enjoying it with like marmalade. What do you do with that feeling or emotion, and or not do? And it was so interesting to see how people reflected. Some people had like really clear models where they were like, they would draw out multiple square boxes like a checklist, and they'd be like, okay, some things are done, some things are not done. And it's clouding my mind. And just having conversations with people through these drawings like helped me understand that some people have who reflect are able to see all of these aspects, but people who haven't had a second to reflect in a while, or like um, they're just like very shut off with sharing their emotions. And some people who've been to therapy had very clear mental models where they were like, okay, is this situation something I've created in my head, or is this real? Do I have any control over it? And a lot of times they would say that, oh, this just came to my mind, like, I'm sorry I didn't draw anything, but like these words just naturally flow. Like the natural flow was there, and that's why I've put it as a flow chart or something. And just all of those interactions, all of the sort of data that I collected from this research, or the interactions that I had through this activity, made me realize that the basic mental model was that people were missing how the emotion was being sparked. A lot of people had this idea that, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling anxious, so I need to do a self care practice or something along those lines. So the prevalent mental model being like they're not able to recognize. And I think mental health awareness has done a very good job of saying, if you're feeling burnt out, you need to take time for yourself. And I think that's an end of pipe solution. And through emotional sustainability, I'm trying to say we need to address this problem at its core. And yeah, that is sort of where the project went. And I collaborated with the graphic designer to illustrate some of the ideas that came through this project. I think that's at the very end of this website, but it's sort of like emotionally constipated as someone being who's not like willing to share their emotions, or mental health days as a band-aid on a much bigger problem, or someone who's internally going through a lot of turmoil, but externally they're just being calm. Yeah, and then I sort of developed a tool, a self-reflection tool with students, like co-created one, and made a set of um, reflection cards for people, um, which sort of was my point into how designers can take it into their practice. And I think going forward, I'm thinking about how I can maybe develop those cards further. Yeah, so this is the emotional first aid tool that we co-designed. So sort of looking at thoughts, emotions, um, communication and actions. And so um, emotions and thoughts at that intersection is where I have feelings. And the idea of the self-reflection tool was that these are four different aspects of behavior, of human behavior. And as designers, we're already using this to design products for consumers. So why not take this, turn it on its head, and use it as a self-reflection tool for our own practices? And this Venn diagram was specially designed this way so that if someone doesn't want to reflect on all aspects of their human behavior right now, because we don't have that mental bandwidth all the time. So if you only want to focus on actions, you just go and look into that space. If you want to reflect on the intersection of emotions and communication, you look at that space. And if you are looking at all the aspects, it's like, okay, what do you actually need to do in this situation? Yeah, so this reflection framework worked really well. I tried it with students using a paper prototype over a week, and yeah, I think the project worked really well. I think the only aspect that I did not factor in while doing this project was my own mental health and emotional bandwidth. Because a lot of times when people don't have the space to reflect and you provide that space, it leaves you being an emotional sponge. Basically, with the tool, it was sort of giving design students who are future designers sort of an emotional first aid tool for their own practice. But I think the point where I started the whole project was also bringing emotional sustainability into the wider design industry. So that's when I sort of designed a few sort of emotional sustainability cards. I think that is like a underdeveloped aspect of the project that I'm hoping to probably get back into this summer. And those cards sort of had four aspects. So it was also around like being aware of this idea of emotions, then reflecting as like as an individual designer on your emotions and your emotional sustainability, then looking at the kind of projects that you're taking on. If money wasn't a factor, would you actually be doing those projects? Are you driven to do those projects? What are your motivations? And then also looking at the last, or like the bigger impact of all of this, what are you designing for? Are you creating widespread empathy? Who is going to benefit from all of these projects? And I feel like that is the thread that I feel like the design industry, um, I wouldn't say design industry, maybe as designers, I want to spread that across or work towards that through my practice.
Thank you. What I really love about listening to your work and your process is just realizing how important design is, because it's like bringing to life and making something tangible and creating an interaction and a tool and an invitation to people to explore than just talking at them. And I guess for me, like it sort of mirrors in a different way, like what I try to do in a facilitated space. It's like, it's not perhaps as tangible as in terms of, and it doesn't have, although I do have a process of my own kind of relationship to emotional sustainability and how that influences how I design facilitated processes.
Yeah.
So it kind of is the same, and it's not the same in some ways, but I just feel like yours is so clear and visual and easy to follow in a different way. So it's more, I guess, accessible, I feel sometimes, than my approach to emotional sustainability. Maybe mine's a bit more subtle and invisible in some ways, in terms of how I work with it as a facilitator.
I
And
think there's also a need for both, though, because a lot of times when people hear the word emotion or sustainability, they're like, okay, maybe she's not doing something tangible. Maybe she's just up in the air and too idealistic. So I think it's really important to be able to put this as a layer, especially in like corporate environments where there might be like, I don't have time for this.
yeah. And I think that is one very common thread for me, and it's kind of the central thread, as well as values. One central thread is our relationship to time, and actually what would happen if we just all slowed down. And that's actually part of living a kind of emotional sustainability practice. The first step is the ability to slow down, slow down our actual inner world, our thoughts, our feelings, our nervous system, so that we can start being more present. And I suppose, moving into talking a little bit about how I use emotional sustainability in my own life, I would say it is a practice and a process. So I always talk about things like listening, for instance, as a practice and a process. So we have to practice something to become good at it. Like if we want to play an instrument, we practice it to become good at it. And I think there are skills that can get us closer to what it means to be really an fully alive human that we could practice. And so I have taken all the things that I've experienced around mindfulness, movement, so yoga, so dance, so really what can we do with our bodies, this holistic mind, body, emotion, we are a system, so we have to attend to all parts of our ecosystem. So our bodies, moving them, I think we've talked so much about emotions being this kind of catalyst of movement, or this necessary movement, and that we're not allowing that movement to happen. So we're becoming stagnated and we're becoming rigid, and actually moving our bodies is a really important part of being with our emotions. So practicing movement, whether that's walking, yoga, dance, those are really important to me. And then connecting to that inner world, so journaling, being creative, creating space for reflection, for worm time, as I like to call it. And then the outer world, which is like our relationship. So how do we show up in relationship to nature, to our friends, our loved ones, and to people that we don't know? And what do we draw on in those moments where we need to be in relationship? And for me, that's kind of this constant process of integrating everything that's happening in me with everything that's happening outside of me. And I think the really important thing about emotional sustainability is it's not a fix. like I think the main thing that's really coming out of this conversation is how emotions are life. Like that's what it means to be alive, to be feeling. And that should be kind of celebrated, but there's a challenge to that. Like emotions are really challenging, and if we live these really fast-paced, stressful lives, and we're living in an increasingly challenging world where we're seeing so much struggle and pain and suffering, if we don't feel something at the moment, then we've completely disconnected ourselves from the world. And I can understand why, because it's really overwhelming and scary. So that's what I think we're sitting with at the moment, is this kind of not wanting to feel everything because there's so much to feel.
Yeah.
But by not wanting to feel, we're not fully alive, and we need fully alive humans to overcome the challenges that we currently have.
Yeah.
We're stuck in this place at the moment. And so it's not about being able to avoid all those uncomfortable or difficult feelings, but it's being able to move through them to feelings that make us more activated and motivated and energized to try and contribute to the challenges and not ignore them.
Yeah.
And we can do that. We don't have to do that on a big global scale as well. We can do that just in our everyday lives with the choices that we make, the people that we interact with. And that's where design can help us, like in a more structured way, I think, with thinking about those choices.
Yeah. And I think how you said it, to ingrain it into our daily lives, really makes sense. Because it's exactly these small shifts that make bigger transformations happen. It's creating, through these daily interactions, we create that foundation or that core of the entire system that we want to carry forward. And yeah, I feel like how you also said about movement is a very big idea, because sometimes I feel like when I come across social media accounts where they're talking about mental health or mindfulness practices, there's a lot of talk about sit with your emotions. And that doesn't always necessarily work. Because being honest, not all emotions, like emotions are information signals. They have helped us survive for so many billions of years, but not just as humans, but as even animals and other beings. But also just the idea of like being aware of emotions. You don't have to always just listen to emotions. Just being aware, okay, I'm feeling maybe jealous because, okay, what that person is doing or what that person is being able to achieve, I wanted that for myself. Just being aware of maybe jealousy in that sense also makes sense, that, okay, I know why I'm feeling this, and then I can cater to that instead of just being like, oh, I'm feeling jealous, so what should I do? And then, so maybe in that space, the movement is, okay, I need to take action for my personal growth.
Yeah, and it's that systems thinking approach, because, you know, the reductionist Western scientific view of looking at things in isolation is, you know, like you talk about wicked problems a lot in your work. It is part of that, because if we only look at something in isolation, we forget that actually values are a really important part of our emotions, and that creativity can help us get out of our emotions, or going and having a walk, or dancing in your room. Like, so we don't just look at it as this, like, oh, I'm feeling an emotion, and then what? Like, and then you have to connect it to the other things, the support system. Like, okay, so I bring in my support system if I'm feeling this. Like, what do I need to reflect on? Like, how is this emotion interacting with my value system, or my, like, my little toolkit that I have? Like, do I need to go and journal? Like, do I need to eat something really delicious? Like, those kind of simple actions, but we have to move like into the action to get ourselves out of the emotional state. I think sometimes there's an element of honoring and making space for that feeling, and that's where the sitting with it comes from. Like, that we have to face it, we have to sit with it. We go, oh, welcome sadness, like, where have you come from today? But we don't stay there like permanently, and we have to take action and move, you know, with it or without it. Like, let it go or take it with us.
And sometimes maybe even sit with it as with a bunch of friends, or being like,
Yeah.
guys, this feeling's been looming over and I don't know how to deal with it. And I feel like 9 times out of 10, your friends are like, I've had that feeling. I know how it feels. And
Yeah.
that just getting that validation just puts you, or at least me personally, at ease.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. And that's
yeah,
something that I really reflected on this year is, as a facilitator, but also as a human being, like we're committed to kind of continuous improvement and personal development, because you have to show up as this quite neutral person to hold a space for others.
yeah,
And when I think about sometimes this self-care is almost become another part of like the capitalist industry, like selling us products or selling
yeah,
us things to make us feel good about ourselves. And it kind of can reinforce like a very individualistic way of being in the world.
yeah,
Actually, for me, like developing myself, like resourcing myself is so I can be a resource for others.
yeah,
And so it is about like moving from the I to the we, like from the individual to the community, and going into that community and being able to connect, like, and share and create empathy and create understanding. And then because we can't, going back to the challenges bit, we can't solve those ourselves. So we need to create like communities and networks where we can support each other. And so when I'm feeling under resourced, maybe someone else can support me and vice versa. So it becomes that mutual reciprocal
yeah,
exchange of a
yeah.
support system.
Yeah. And also, I think just as humans, we're relational beings. We
Mm,
can't exist in isolation, whether that's relations with fellow humans, with our surroundings. And I think that theme of reciprocity really comes in, where it's also about not just what you're able to take, but also what you're
yeah.
able to give to the environment. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking about our future project. So we're coming to the end of our time. So let's go to our final question,
Yeah.
which is how, and I think we've touched on it a bit, and you've just hinted, I think, at our collaboration that we're going to be doing, but how is emotional sustainability guiding your practice going forward?
Yeah. I think I am slightly in a tricky part of my design career, I would say, like the trajectory. Coming out of college and then working on like having these really two amazing jobs last year. And now, since the contracts are over, I'm trying to re understand where I want to get into, because also with the job market, it's quite hard. I think the emotional sustainability practice has helped me in maybe three ways. The first was that I think I understood. I spent January and February just being in that phase of, oh, I really need a job. Since I am in a tricky position being on a visa and the complications that come with that. So just understanding, I think emotional sustainability first helped me understanding that I need creativity back in my life. I am a designer, um, and I want to be doing creative things. So just doing logistical and admin work was making me creatively dead. I felt brain dead at some point where I was like, do I really remember the skills I was taught or I have been practicing for so many years? So that was the first aspect. The second aspect is I think it helped me because I had done a project that had different legs. I think it really helped me putting the project together for my website. It reminded me that the project has a lot of potential, and I think one aspect is where I want to develop those cards for emotional sustainability for like the wider practice. Like I will, after like 1 year of break from the project, I'm in that headspace where I'm like, okay, I'm going to pick up this project and develop it further at some point, like starting now, but it'll take some time to develop, obviously. And I think the third aspect is all the collaborations that it has helped me, especially the connections that it has helped me. For example, you and I are we connected through emotional sustainability through this project because I came across your website, you came across my project, and just that the alignment of values and understanding of the project and the concept and the framework has opened up opportunities for collaboration. So also, I think emotional sustainability and debugging the idea of having a proper job and this is progress and you should be making this much money in a year. I mean, touch wood, I'm in a privileged position to be able to pursue so many diverse things at the same time. But yeah, I think just personally understanding that I still need to be creative, picking up the project back up again and exploring collaborations and developing different things through it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I can echo that. I reflected on it. What I found interesting, you say that it's been a year since you've done the project. It's been 10 years since I've done mine. And in that time, and you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, but in that time, the Inner Development Goals have been launched. And I do think emotional sustainability fits in a lot with those 5 different dimensions and the 23 skills and behaviors that they've outlined there. So I think that it's a really good indicator that other people are recognizing how important it is to really bring attention to these kind of different aspects of what it means to be human and how they will impact what we actually do and achieve together. I think I continue to really explore communication approaches in my work. So looking at dialogue and deep democracy and nonviolent communication to bring these things we've been talking about to life. So to think about values, to think about how we relate to each other, to bring in the emotions, to bring in the body, to have that more holistic whole way of being with each other and thinking. And then I think, we've touched on it as well, is just that we're living in increasingly challenging, difficult times. And so I really feel this work is so needed that we can't turn off our emotions, because what's really stood out for me in this conversation is just how emotions are making us alive, and we need to be fully alive to really work together and face those challenges. And that's going to mean that we have to connect with our grief, with our pain, with our anger, with our sadness. But it also means that we get to really feel full of joy and creativity and connection. So we have to be able to hold all those different emotional states and dance between them.
Yeah. And it's also perhaps only when you're able to feel the pain and the grief that you're able to be happy and enjoy that sort of excitement. It's only because the experience of one makes you value the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for a so incredibly rich conversation. It's been a real joy to really go a bit deeper into this idea of emotional sustainability. I think we should have a checkout. So in our last minutes together, is there one thing that's really stood out for you from this conversation that you would like to take away, or one thing that you would like to offer someone listening to this?
I think one thing that's really stood out, I mean, obviously we've been in touch for a few months, but I think talking at length today has helped me also see, because this is quite fresh and in my very recent years, while looking at your practice and seeing how emotional sustainability is so well ingrained, I think that's my vision for the future as a designer, for those values, for those practices to be such drivers of meaningful interactions, meaningful projects. And if I had to tell someone, a takeaway for someone, maybe I'm not in a position to say anything, but just I think reflectivity, being able to reflect, or critical reflexivity, goes a very long way. I feel like during my bachelor's, that was something that had been muted. And when I started doing that again at UAL, I felt like someone took my brain, put it on a golden platter, and was like, here, you left it. So I think critical reflexivity goes a very long way. Not just okay, I'm designing this project, but okay, why are you designing this project? What's the impact you're trying to create? And even if it's not impact, what's the purpose? What's the meaning? Actually, making informed decisions.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about the flour that made the bread that made the toast.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you? What stood out to you, or what would your one piece for the audience be?
I mean, so much of it stood out, and I'm definitely going to go back and reflect on it all. But I think actually, I would like to go right back to the beginning of the conversation where we shared a little bit about how we got interested in it, because I think what stood out for me is that it was something we both needed, that we both had emotionally turbulent times.
Yeah.
And what we were able to do as designers, as creative people, is draw on our natural creativity in a way that allowed us to make sense of it, to navigate it, to design like coping or even thriving mechanisms for it. And I think that for me is like the power of creativity. And I really truly believe that all humans are creative. So we just need to reconnect. There's just so many things, so many threads that we need to weave back together for people. Like your creativity, your values, your emotions, like what's important to you to like weave this beautiful picture of potential. And that kind of ability to transform, and going back to my check-in of being melted mozzarella, it's that like transformation that can take place, and that's there available for everyone, if they can just kind of connect to these different threads of what it means to be human.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. I think also just that idea of like everyone being creative. It's something that we've somehow missed. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This was really nice. I think just having two different points of view into the whole similar concept or like was amazing. I think it's quite inspiring as well.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for agreeing to have the conversation.
Of course, thank you.